Pubs, Atheist Pub. I'm a bit nervous. I have a very special guest today. I'm live with you with Joe Schmid from the channel Majesty of Reason, the YouTube channel, the website. Joseph is me. Oh, I'm gone. Oh my God, I'm a bit nervous. Okay, I'm gonna put this. Okay, visit the website and make sure you visit his uh, YouTube channel. Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to introduce Joseph. He's a student. Well, no longer. He has a BA in philosophy with the highest distinction from Purdue University. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. Boiler up.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna be reading a couple of things of your resume. It's just astounding. I feel like my life has been wasted.
No.
Okay, let me put it this way, everyone. Joe has published at least 8 articles and one forthcoming. The first one is Stage 1 of Aristotelian Proof, a critical appraisal, Simply Unsuccessful, the Neoplatonic Proof of God's Existence, Existential Inertia and the Aristotelian Proof, Classical Theism, Arbitrary Creation and Reason-Based Action in Sophia, The Fruitful Death of Moral Collapse Arguments, the aloneness argument against classical theism, and I can keep going. He has at least, if I'm not wrong, a couple of books published.
Yeah, yep, 2 of them. They're actually both behind me. Let me see if I can point correctly. Okay, yeah, so the one right here is my first one. I self-published that one, The Majesty of Reason, A Short Guide to Critical Thinking in Philosophy. Very cheap on Amazon. By contrast, this one is monumentally expensive, Existential Inertia and Classical Theistic Proofs, that is published with Springer, and the reason it's so expensive is because it is from an academic press, and they mainly serve libraries. So yeah, but 2 books, yeah, exciting stuff.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. And I see that you have a ton of works in progress, like here for revision, ontological arguments, the end is near, Green Reapers and the endless futures, and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah, I'm very excited about all that stuff. Fingers crossed
Yeah,
that
I'm
it'll
excited as
eventually get
well.
published.
I've been watching your content like nonstop for the past 6 months. I was especially interested on your take on the first mover and your take on the Hilbert's Hotel and causal finitism. To be honest, I was against causal finitism before I started listening to you and reading you, and well, you actually fueled. So let's get into the topics. The first question is, let's see, why are you agnostic?
Yeah, good question. Great question. So, I should probably start by defining terms. So, here's how philosophers generally use the terms, and this is how I'm going to use the terms. Some internet communities use the terms differently. That's fine. We can have a plurality of different usages of terms. This is just how I and philosophers use them. Okay, so a theist is roughly someone who believes that God exists. An atheist is someone who believes that God doesn't exist. And finally, an agnostic suspends judgment on the question of whether or not God exists. They neither believe that God exists, but nor do they believe that God doesn't exist. So that's what an agnostic is. They are suspending judgment on the question. Now, all of us are agnostic towards certain questions and certain propositions. So take, for instance, the question, how many stars are there in the universe? Is it even or odd?
Oh
Well,
my
I
God.
surmise that, I surmise none of us believe either way. We just suspend judgment on the matter. So we're all agnostic towards that question of whether the stars are even or whether the stars are odd. We're all agnostic on that. So you can be agnostic towards different propositions. For present purposes, we're interested in agnosticism towards God's existence.
Mm-hmm.
So again, an agnostic is someone who suspends judgment on whether or not God exists. So then why is that? Why would I think that? Well, the reason is because by my lights, the evidence that I've looked at, the reasons that I've looked at for and against God's existence, very roughly counterbalance one another. Because of that, I think the evidential scales are very, very roughly counterbalanced, and so I proportion my credence accordingly. I proportion that according to what I take the evidence to reveal to me, and I proportion it, therefore, somewhere around 50-50. It's not exactly perfect, and I don't really have a precise confidence level, but I just say it's roughly counterbalanced by my lights. And so that results in a suspension of judgment one way or another. And yeah, so the main reason is just because I think that there's evidence for and against God's existence, and to me, roughly counterbalances. So that's the short of it. Of course, I could go on for dozens upon dozens of hours as to why I think the evidence is roughly counterbalanced, but so yeah.
And you can trust him on that. He's got videos which are like a dozen hours long.
Yes.
And yeah, I've watched complete. Even though some people say that nobody watches that, I
Not
disagree.
true. Yeah, I know many people who have watched the whole thing. They go on long road trips. They've listened to it over weeks. I've had a bunch of people email me about that and message me saying they watch it. So it's great.
Yeah, no, I thought it was wonderful, especially when people say, no, there's 100 arguments for the existence of God, and then you take them one by one and just pretty much you either rebut them or you find some undercutting the feeders. For people in the audience, if we can explain the difference between a rebuttal and an undercutting the feeder, would be wonderful.
Yeah. So whenever we're looking at arguments, whenever we're engaged in dialogue with people who disagree, usually we're trying to offer reasons for certain conclusions. So we'll offer a reason, and that's supposed to support a conclusion. And so the relation of support between the reason and conclusion, that can be defeated in various ways. And what that means is that you can either overturn the support that the reason would otherwise be providing to the conclusion. You could show that it doesn't actually support it after all, or you can show either that the reason is false or that the conclusion is false. So basically, undercutting and rebutting defeaters track those different ways of responding to arguments and responding to reasons. So briefly, an undercutting defeater basically just says that, hey, this conclusion isn't adequately justified. Either that reason you gave doesn't support it, or maybe the reason was you came to believe in the reason in an unreliable way, or you came to believe in the conclusion in an unreliable way. In some manner, you're trying to remove their justification for thinking that the conclusion is true. So you're not saying that the conclusion is false. You're not saying that the reason is false. You're just removing justification for thinking that they're true. By contrast, a rebutting defeater actually gives some positive reason to think that the conclusion is false, or maybe a premise in the argument, like a reason offered on behalf of the conclusion. That would constitute a rebutting defeater. You are rebutting in the sense of giving some positive reason to think that they're false. So like an example, like if someone provides to me an analysis of knowledge and they want to say that, hey, I know something if and only if I believe it and it's true. Well, you can give a rebutting defeater to that. You can show that that's false by means of a counterexample. We have reason to think that that's false because suppose that I'm on a multiple choice quiz and I have no clue what the answer is, but somehow I convince myself to just believe that it's C. I have no reason whatsoever. It's a total random guess, but I convince myself to believe it, and it ends up being true. I didn't actually know that the answer is C, but yeah, and that just seems obvious. And so this constitutes a counterexample to that analysis of knowledge. And so we have a reason to think that the analysis is false. That's a rebutting defeater. An undercutting defeater would basically just say, hey, that analysis of knowledge, you've given us no reason to accept that. You haven't justified that. So anyway, that's the difference.
Oh, I understand. It's just whenever I find a fallacy on someone's argument, I tell them, okay, this doesn't mean your conclusion is false, but you can't use that in order to support it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, I've been reading Existential, Inertia, and Classical Theistic Proofs, and it's dense, like really dense.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So I've been trying to familiarize. I am not a philosophy student, or I'm just an amateur. I'm a philosophy enthusiast.
Yeah.
Like I really like reading about science and philosophy, and I'm in love with your content. By the way, everyone, I can't tell you enough. I can't invite you enough to go to. Let me show the sign. Make sure you visit the Majesty of Reason YouTube channel. There's not many videos, probably pretty much like less than 100, right?
It's actually over 100 at this point. It's like, I think it might be 110 or something, or 115.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, yeah, although, let me put it this way. I have over 400 episodes, and they're all live, right? So yeah. It's really different. I'm used to saying that 20-minute video publication usually takes about 2 or 3 days for preparing. Joe makes 3 hour long videos
Yeah, yeah.
with weeks and hours of preparation. So make sure you go there. Make sure if you don't understand what Hilbert's Hotel, as proposed by William Lane Craig, make sure you visit his Kalam list with rationality rules. Oh my god, I'm so nervous. I don't know why.
It's fun. It's fun talking about these things. So yeah, it's totally understandable. Yeah, I thank you for shouting out the Kalam playlist. That's like my favorite playlist. Of course, I'm biased because it's my own playlist, but it's one of my favorite playlists. So I put a lot of effort into my Kalam playlist videos on the Kalam cosmological argument. So anyone who's interested in the Kalam, I think they should check out that playlist.
No, it's amazing. It's just amazing, and it really goes on to show that you deal with several different ways of theology or philosophy of religion. Tell me if I'm wrong. I used to say that philosophy of religion is one thing. It's a particular branch of philosophy, a valid one, in search for truth. But I accuse all of you of cheating.
Yeah, see, I see it as a difference in starting point. I think that's the best way to view it. Philosophy of religion, usually the starting point there is just the starting point of philosophy. You know, you're not assuming that God exists. You're not assuming God doesn't exist. You're not assuming that a holy book is inspired. You're just starting with reason alone, and you're trying to see what we can come up with arguments and etc. But theology has a different starting point, and usually it's starting with certain base assumptions and then working from there. So usually it starts with a working assumption that God exists and that he revealed a certain text, like the Bible, and then you go from there and you try to work out maybe a worldview, a systematic theology, etc. So I think it's just a difference in starting point.
I call it cheating.
Yeah.
Okay, that's too much for me. But okay, let's go for the existential inertia thesis. And some people might not understand the difference between the thesis and the phenomenon. So if you would like to help us with that.
Yeah. So I mean, let's just think about inertia more generally. So like, we all learned in high school, or at least I assume we all learned in high school that you know, if you have like a particle and it's just moving in a straight line at a constant velocity through space, and there are no forces interacting with it, there's no like gravitational force pulling it in one direction, there's no normal force pulling it or pushing it in some other direction, the particle is just going to maintain its rectilinear velocity. It's just going to go in a straight line. It doesn't need something to continually give it an impetus to continue like push it along. Instead, it just goes along of its own accord, as it were, and it just maintains its rectilinear velocity. It's a similar idea with existential inertia. So it's applying that idea of what we could call spatial inertia or mechanical inertia, where things like move through space, like without needing some kind of continual impetus, and they maintain their velocity unless they're positively obstructed. It's the same idea with existential inertia, just applying that to the existence of things. So things, at least some temporal things, persist in existence through time unless and until they're obstructed by some destructive factor, and without needing some kind of continual impetus that pushes them along, right? It's just like think about the mechanical inertia. So things go through space at a continuous rectilinear velocity, and they don't need some continual impetus, and they change their direction if something acts on them. So similarly, things persist in existence without some kind of continual sustaining cause, without some kind of continual impetus from without that sustains them in being at every single moment. And they go out of existence when something comes along to destroy them, whether that thing is internal or external to them. So that's the basic idea. Things persist in existence, or at least some temporal things persist in existence, in the absence of both outside sustenance, some kind of outside sustaining cause that continually gives them being at each and every moment, and also they cease to exist whenever they're caused to do so. So that's the basic idea behind the thesis. So that's the thesis, right? That's just a description that purports to describe how things in the world, or at least how some things in the world, behave. But you can distinguish that from the actual like phenomenon of things behaving in that way, right? So like this what is this? This is a water bottle. I've got some cool little things here. So you see that says, "Do you even logic?" That's Bertrand Russell.
Nice.
That's a little 5 for philosophy. There, down there, that is Hilbert's Hotel. You can see that.
Oh,
It
that's
says,
wonderful.
no vacancies, but we can move some people around. And then that says this statement is untrue. So yeah. Anyway, the phenomenon is just like this water bottle persisting in like actually persisting in existence in the way that the existential inertia thesis describes. So it's important to keep these two separate. We have a thesis which is purporting to describe reality. That thesis can be true or false, and then the things which behave in accordance with the thesis, that's like the phenomenon. Yeah, and if the thesis is true, then yeah, there are some things really do behave in accordance with it. If it's false, then nothing behaves in accordance with it. So it's similar to, it's just similar to like the thesis of theism, which is just like a description saying, hey, there's this thing called God, and then the phenomenon, which is like God himself, right? It's an important distinction, but people oftentimes overlook it.
Yeah, I tend to think, well, I understood it the first time you mentioned it, or I heard you mention it on one of your videos where you take on Aquinas' first way, an argument that fails to potentialize, to actualize its potential, or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
which was wonderful. And as I understand it, well, if existential inertia is truth, then Thomism, actually Aquinas, is always like fail, right? Are false.
Yeah, I mean, at least the first three ways, I think. I mean, there's a lot of interpretational difficulties. Like, there has been a huge blossoming of different interpretations of each of the 5 ways. So it's difficult to make pronouncements about all of them. You have to kind of talk about different interpretations. But at least the first 3, it's generally agreed that they rely on something like sustaining causation. And if that's the case, then yeah, existential inertia is going to be a challenge to each of the first 3, and a lot of other arguments that classical theists in particular use.
Okay. So I'm trying to get the chat to work here on Restream, but it doesn't seem to work, so I'm not gonna be able to place the questions in the chat, but we'll see that on the end. By the way, I remember I sent you one of my crazy ideas by email. I don't know if you remember that. I told you about God's will.
Yeah, we could talk about that here. So I don't remember it. You're gonna have to remind me, and we can chat about it here. I see someone in the comment section said, "Greetings from Argentina." Well, saludos desde Estados Unidos. So,
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, everybody is like, I'm gonna read the comments right now. Greetings to such a prodigious young man from Argentina. I'm already subscribed to your channel, and he's saying that he's listening to 2 things at once. This one and another person that we admire, which is called Aristarchus X or Aristarchus X. Oh, by the way, we're fans as well of Enrique F. Gell.
yeah, I talked with him about this. So, he's like, it's like the sect within Spanish that's like Catalan, so it's pronounced gel. Apparently,
Yeah.
no, it's like gel or something like that. It's so weird to me because I'm used to learning Spanish where G followed by an E is always je. It's never j. So and apparently it's like Enrique. It's like not even Enrique. It's
Yeah.
Enrique apparently. So
Enrique.
yeah, it's so interesting. Anyway, I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah. His name is like hard to say. We always call him Enrique or something like that.
Yeah.
And I've chatted with him a few times, and I was reading his paper, and then I read your paper, and well, I was like having fun reading both of you. Now, they were asking about the 5 for philosophy, if it's always a shorthand for philosophy. And I think it is, right?
Among philosophers, it is. I don't know about among non-philosophers because I'm not in those circles very much. So, but yeah, like in my philosophy classes, oftentimes when the professors are lazy and they don't want to write philosophy out, they'll just write phi.
All right. Well, I was when I sent you the email, I was talking about the principle of causality and if it can be used as a metaphysical principle. I don't know if it can actually. Maybe I'm wrong. I've been using it to argue on different setups. I used to debate. I debate a lot on TikTok and on YouTube. I invite people to join the Discord server and be part of the discussion table. But people tend to be a bit lazy to get into Discord. I have like 400 people, which are all atheists or agnostic, and nobody gets into actually have a productive conversation, because the thing is, we're not here to shout at each other. We wanna talk to each other. So I've been using this causality principle as a metaphysical principle, but I try to deepen my thought on it, about the causal chain. I don't know if you may agree that any cause needs, like, it must have some kind of interaction with its effect, right? And so I'm proposing that, when I describe God, when we have these conversations, I don't know if you have ever debated with somebody that doesn't know philosophy. Yeah.
Yes, I
Okay.
have.
Okay. So it's really hard, right? Sometimes. So you have to get on their shoes and see where they see things from, right? So some people lean towards pantheism, some lean towards panentheism, some have a very cultural and generational understanding of God, like, not with a bearded man in the sky, but
But
still
close, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but still some kind of person with a kind of power over the world, right? Like the power to change things in the world by will alone, like no interaction required. Yeah, but that would break the causal chain.
Yeah, okay, so this is an interesting argument. I think there are two ways that the theist might go in response. One thing they could do, and this is the more, shall we say, conciliatory response, they could grant you that causal principle. They say, okay, any cause needs to interact with its effect in some way. So, like, when a cause exerts its causal power on an effect in some way, it also has to be the case that the effect exerts some sort of causal influence on the cause as well. Let's say that they grant that. Well, then, they might just say, okay, yeah, God interacts, God causes things in creation, and in so doing, maybe creation causally influences him in some way. Maybe it causally influences his mind. Maybe he receives some information from it. Maybe that's how he knows the things that go on in creation. It's a kind of quasi-perception or something like that. So the one thing they could say is, like, this doesn't conflict with core aspects of their theistic view, even if they accepted this principle. So that's one thing, and then we can pursue that. But let me just make the second response that the theist could make before we pursue each of these. And then the second response that the theist could make is just to reject that principle. Or, I mean, they could say, like, they could either give a rebutting or undercutting defeat, or they could give some reason to think that it's false. They might give some positive reason to think that, no, causes don't need to interact with their effects. They just need to exert some influence on them. So they could rebut it, or they could just undermine it. They could say, well, that isn't sufficiently justified. We don't have good reason to think that that's true. So they could go one of those two directions. But in some way or another, they're going to be questioning that principle. So there are those two branches. The second branch that I just mentioned is questioning the principle. The first branch is granting the principle, but saying, hey, I can still have theism with that principle. So let's
Okay.
go down those two branches. Yeah, let's explore those.
Well, I was thinking more of the interaction, the one way interaction between cause and effect, from cause to effect, instead of forth and back. But the way you said it's wonderful, because it has back and forth. But still, that would entail an interaction from the effect to God in order for him to know stuff, right? Okay, but where could I point to from the interaction from God to the effect?
So are you? So it kind of depends on what we're asking there. I mean, I think the theist will probably just say, well, the direction from God to the effect is like just God's causing the things to exist. He's causing the Earth to exist, and then the Earth's existence kind of somehow causally impinges on his mind in some way, that he's informed of the that there is an Earth or something like that. Yeah, I mean, I think they're just going to say it's something like God's causing things to exist. That's where the effect is. It's them existing. That's the direction.
Okay. Then, well, I don't know if it's a good or a bad argument, but I think it tends
Yeah,
to
and my
give.
goal Yeah, my goal here is to basically help you and your audience, like, just think through this, right? To have tools to probe this argument, to think through it clearly. You know, I'm not trying to settle debates here. I mean, these are really interesting questions, and philosophers debate them. So
No. That's what I love about your channel. It's just that you take on the questions, and I think that you place them on the most objective way possible. Like you tend to check what it has, what it means, what it says, the effort that belongs to the person that's proposing this argument, and you accept it. You say you regularly say great things about the people that are publishing stuff and etc. Even if they are criticizing you, I've watched you like say, no, well, I really appreciate the effort, blah blah blah. I know that, and well, I really appreciate the effort. Thank you very much for helping me with that. Thing is, okay, then maybe we can move on from my argument and go for. There's a very particular person in my audience that has been reading the Summa Theologiae, and well, he's gonna be sending us a few questions in a few minutes, but still, I sent them to your video. There is a particular video in Majesty of Reason that's called Aquinas First Way. We've mentioned it, and if the people that's in right now has not seen this, make sure you visit the Majesty of Reason YouTube channel.
yeah, and for people who are interested in that video in particular, an updated form of the content of that video with much more rigorous and precise and formalized reasoning is actually chapter 2 of, I pointed the wrong direction, chapter 2 of Existential, Inertia, and Classical Theistic Proofs. So chapter 2 in there is on Aquinas' First Way. So those who want to dig in deeper, and I've updated some of my thoughts since that video, I've crystallized them, I've formed them in a much more rigorous manner, they can check out chapter 2 of that book.
Yeah, I was basing myself a lot on your video, and I actually went all the way to chapters. It's 5, 6, and 7 that deal with EIT.
Yeah, I think it's 4 through 7, something like that. Because well, 4 is on the Aristotelian causal principle, but it's also on existential inertia. But yeah, I think it's 4 through 7.
Okay. So well, maybe we should go to the book a bit more. We have a few minutes before the question and answers, and you see in the chapter 3, you make an evaluation of Phaser's Aristotelian proof. Can you talk to us about that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So the proof itself has 50 steps. 50, that's not 15, 50, right? So I'm not going to be able to go through the proof here. But let's just go through a simplified version. I think this is a streamlined version. And I think it conveys the essential core idea. 1, there are changeable beings. So things that, can change. They're a mixture of act and potency. They have potentials to change. Let's just call those changeable beings. So yeah, premise 1 is that there are changeable beings.
Okay.
Like you and me and tables and chairs and trees, etc. Okay, there are changeable beings. Premise 2, any changeable being requires a sustaining cause in order to exist at any given moment of its existence. Premise 3, since any given changeable being requires a sustaining cause at any given moment of its existence, that cause itself is either unchangeable or it's changeable, right? If it's unchangeable, then we've kind of gotten to our conclusion that there's an unchangeable first cause. If it's changeable, well, then we've kind of got a hierarchical chain of dependence here. We've got the changeable thing, which is being sustained in existence by a changeable thing. But again, per our principle that every changeable thing requires a sustaining cause, this thing is also going to require a sustaining cause. So it needs something else underneath it. Now, that thing is either changeable or unchangeable. And if it's unchangeable, we get our conclusion, right? But if it's changeable, then it's going to need a sustaining cause. And you see where we're going. You can't go ad infinitum in sustaining causes of existence at any given moment. It needs to bottom out in some first cause. And that first cause, so Phaser argues, has to be unchangeable. Because if it were changeable, per that premise that I mentioned, it would have to have a further cause. But remember, it's the first cause. So it can't have a further cause. And so it can't be changeable. It has to be unchangeable. And so we've gotten to this unchangeable first cause. Since it's unchangeable, it doesn't have any potentialities for change. It's going to be purely actual. And this we call God. Okay, that's the basic argument. There are many, many different problems with this argument that I articulate in the book. I honestly don't know where to start. Okay, so like I'll just talk maybe about three problems. Firstly, this rests on very contentious metaphysical underpinnings, like the act potency distinction, like pluralism about ways of being. That is, there are like numerically distinct ways or modes of existence, like kinds of existence, like actual existence and potential existence. Vast majority of philosophers reject that kind of view. I reject it, and so it has various metaphysical underpinnings that I don't think are adequately justified and also are highly contentious. That's the first problem that I'm going to say. Second problem that I'm going to say is I don't think that there's sufficient reason to accept that second premise, which says that any changeable thing requires a sustaining cause at any moment at which it exists. I think existential inertia thesis is a plausible thesis. I think there are reasons in support of it, and I think the reasons against it are successful. So that's my second criticism, existential inertia. And then my third criticism is that step from unchangeable being to God. I think that's totally implausible. There are so many different non-theistic proposals for what an unchangeable being might be. It doesn't need to be God. And the goal of chapter 8 in my book is to explain why Phaser's various different inferences to define attributes don't work. So, yeah, those are my three main criticisms for present purposes.
Oh, that's wonderful. I tend to accuse a lot of the thinkers, the religious thinkers, that they go to these conclusions and then they steal the conclusion, the end of the chain, and then they glue the God identity.
Yeah, they just slap it on there.
Yeah, like they finish. Okay, that's great. God, that's God.
Yeah. Stage one is just this huge, elaborate edifice of reasoning. Like, oh yes, we've got the act potency distinction, and we reason to this foundational thing. And, it's like, it's super elaborate. But then, you get to the first cause, and they're like, bam, it's God. No more. Yeah. I mean, again, in fairness to Phaser, at least, he tries to spell out the various inferences. The problem with that, though, is that they don't work. But in popular presentations, you'll very often see people do the first stage, get to a first cause, and say, bam, God. But it's like, whoa, that is a huge leap. But anyway.
Yeah, I understand. Actually, and there's one thing that was part of the explanation, and I used to have problems with hierarchical causes, right? But then I saw your Aquinas video, and your drawing, your munificent drawing was a work of art where you make like a Cartesian board, and there is a time frame, like moving forward from, I don't know, left to right, right to left, whatever, and the ontological hierarchy goes from bottom up. And there is a particular part that caught my interest, where, okay, there may be some ontological hierarchy at the bottom, but then you placed some ontological hierarchy in the middle, preceded by some time causes, like
like a linear cause. So yeah, basically, like, even if you show that something is uncaused in the hierarchical chain, it doesn't follow that it's uncaused simpliciter, because it might be causally influenced in a linear chain that goes up to it and influences it in some way. It's just, yeah, this thing is first with respect to this particular causal chain and being hierarchical. So it's not like caused in a certain respect, but it might be caused in another respect, which is like a linear chain. So yeah, and I tried to illustrate that with a handy dandy diagram with my beautiful art skills. So yeah.
I recommend you guys to go watch that, and yeah, the artwork is amazing. Just go watch it. Yeah, Trump himself says that.
Yeah.
So, so okay. Well, Phaser's Aristotelian proof we just know it doesn't work, right? So there was, I'm checking my notes. It's chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7, existential inertia. Then you go on chapter 8 with the stage 2 of Aristotelian proof. I don't know if you want to touch that, or should I keep going mulling through the book?
We don't need to touch that. I'd have to spell out each of the individual inferences to divine attributes, and that would take way too long.
Yeah, that's hard, right? Well, that's long, right?
Yeah.
For people who are interested, go get the book. It's a bit expensive, but it's worth it. It's published by Springer, and you can find it in Amazon. If you can't afford that, just buy Majesty of Reason, a guide for critical thinking.
Yeah, or just email me, and I could probably help you. So yeah, that's all I'll say.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And by the way, there is a bonus to some of his videos. Yeah, there is bonus soccer.
That's
Oh,
true. There is bonus football.
bonus football. Yeah. By the way, long lives Arsenal.
Yeah, let's go. Come on, you Gunners.
I'm
I've
a
got
big
my
fan of
yeah,
Arsenal,
let's
even though
go.
I don't watch so much soccer as I used to, but I used to go for Arsenal
Yes, I'm
for
a
a very
huge
long
Arsenal
time.
fan. I'm a
Okay,
diehard.
let's see. So here in the Atheist Pubs, we've talked about many topics, and one of the biggest ones is free will. I don't know your take on free will. I'm kind of a libertarian in w- pretty much Sartre way, Jean-Paul Sartre, uh, kind of like that, but still. And in morals, I'm an intersubjectivist, but I've heard you speak about moral realism, and now I'm doubtful. Now I don't know where to go, man. So if you want to talk about free will and the consequences for that, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, this is, I mean, out of all the topics that I've studied in philosophy, free will has to be the most difficult, I think. It's got to be the most difficult. It's so tough. Okay, so what is free will? I guess we should ask that firstly. So, as philosophers generally understand it, this isn't universally agreed upon in philosophy, very little is, but this is generally how the free will literature has defined free will. So, it's roughly the control that we exert in action that undergirds our responsibility for our actions. So it's basically the control that we need in order to be responsible for actions. We exert a kind of control, and that control is what is the control that's needed in order for us to be held responsible for them, to be appropriately blamed or appropriately praised, etc. So do we have that kind of control in action that's required for moral responsibility? Really good question. Really tough question. I lean towards thinking so. We'll go on to the question of whether or not it's compatibilist or libertarian in a second, but we have to at least ask: do we have such a thing? Do we have this kind of control needed to be morally responsible? I find it plausible. I think. Firstly, it just seems like a datum of experience. I mean, again, I could be wrong, but it just seems to be a datum. It seems to be like just like how it seems to be a datum that I'm conscious right now. It seems to be a datum that I'm sufficiently in control of at least some of my actions to be held accountable for them. It just seems really obvious, to be honest. It's not much of an argument, but I mean, do we really need arguments here? Like, do I need an argument to give you an argument that I'm conscious? No, not really. So anyway, we could look at the skeptical arguments, etc. But just for now, I'm going to assume that there is free will. I find that plausible enough to the point that, yeah, I think that there's probably free will in that sense. Now, the question is, what kind of free will do we have? And there, I honestly don't know. It's so complicated. The literature is just vastly complicated. So, broadly speaking, there are different camps. There are the libertarians who think that free will is incompatible with determinism and that we have free will. So determinism is false. So that's what libertarians think. They think free will is incompatible with determinism. Determinism is the idea that later states of the universe are strictly entailed by earlier states of the universe together with the laws of nature. So basically, given the paths and the laws, there's only one possible future, one physically possible future. So then libertarians think that that's not compatible with us being free and that we are free. By contrast, compatibilists think that, no, hey, determinism is perfectly compatible with us being free. You can be responsible for your actions so that you can have enough control in action so that you're responsible for them. Even though determinism is true, that's entirely possible. That's what compatibilists say. I'm agnostic between compatibilism and libertarianism. They give different accounts of freedom. Which one is true? I honestly don't know. There are arguments for and against each. Against compatibilists, there is this famous argument called the manipulation argument. The basic idea is just that it's pretty easy, or I don't want to say easy. You can kind of cook up cases in which agents are manipulated in various ways to do certain actions. So maybe there was like a neuroscientist that's playing with their psychology or that's toying with them in some way to get them to do something, to causally determine them to do something. And you can oftentimes have someone be manipulated and yet satisfy what the compatibilists think is sufficient for being free and responsible. So you can be both manipulated and responsible. And a lot of people think that's really implausible. So that's an argument against compatibilism. That's really popular. and I'm simplifying just for the gurus in the audience who know a lot about these debates. But then an argument, I mean, here's one argument against libertarianism. A lot of people think that it's just, you can't have this kind of leeway that libertarians often like to emphasize, where you really, given all the same causal conditions leading up to your choice, given all your same beliefs and desires and reasons, given all your conscious and psychological states, your personality and everything, somehow you could have gone differently. Like you chose A in one world and you chose B in another world. That just seems like random. You just chose A in one world, and then in another world, despite the fact that all the same prior conditions obtained, you just found yourself choosing B. A lot of people think that that's a kind of luck, that's a kind of arbitrariness, that's a kind of chance, that's inimical to responsibility. That doesn't help you be responsible. That's a hindrance to responsibility if it's just kind of this chance or luck occurrence. And it really does, if you think about it, does seem to be luck. Think about those two worlds, in one of which you choose A and the other of which you choose B. If you're libertarianly free in a way that requires you to have leeway between these two options, then given all the same prior conditions obtained in both worlds. So it's like there's nothing you could point to in either world to like differentially explain why you chose one rather than the other, right? Because all the same factors are exactly the same up to the moment of choice. So then it's like there's no difference in these worlds that could explain the difference between the outcomes, between the choices. And if that's so, then it just seems to be like a random occurrence. So how could that be a free choice? It's just an intuition that some compatibilists level against libertarian views. At least some libertarian views. So anyway, there are a bunch of different arguments in this area. It's really confusing. It's really difficult. There's like thousands upon thousands of papers, and I'm not exaggerating when I say thousands upon thousands. There are thousands of papers and books arguing for and against each of these. And so for me, it's just this monstrously complicated literature, and I just throw up my hands at some point, and I'm like, okay, cool. Like I really don't know, guys.
My intuition is we have free will. That's it.
Yeah, that's basically where I go. It's like, okay, what's the precise nature of free will? I don't know. Do we have it? Yeah, that seems like a datum. It's like consciousness, right? Like, yeah, I'm conscious, obviously, but like, what's the precise nature of it? Then it's all hell breaks loose when you ask that. Everyone thinks different things.
Yeah, well, but still, it has some like let me put it this way. It entails some problems for morals and law and personal responsibility, right?
Yeah.
If everything is determined, then how can someone be responsible for, I don't know, committing a crime or I don't know, something like that, right? I think we have to like accept free will in order to work as a society.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Well, a lot of philosophers argue that, but a lot of philosophers disagree with that. Whether or not you could, have a functioning society without something like either a belief in free will or actually there being free will. But yeah, I mean, at least in how we tend to view people, how we tend to engage in interpersonal interactions, how we tend to view criminals, how we tend to view people who commit wrongdoing to us. We really do seem to believe, I mean, implicitly, we seem to recognize that people are responsible, and we hold them to account, we blame them, we praise them, etc. So, I mean, it's rife within our ordinary practices. I think that's really what you're getting at. And I think that's plausible. I think that's probably true.
Okay, that's wonderful. So, okay, on morals, I just said I'm an intersubjectivist. I don't know how to explain that, but I would love to pick on your mind on the moral realism a bit more, because I don't know if you have many videos on that. I've watched. It's just that I've been consuming a lot of Aquinas, and your column list is like it's like a must. Like I just keep rolling it and hearing it on my podcast and on my cell phone. It's over and over and over. I love it.
Yeah. So yeah, moral realism, good. So I guess we should get clear on what this thesis is. So moral realism basically has 3 or 4 parts. And let me write these down so I don't forget them. First one is cognitivism. I'm going to explain these in a second, but I have to write them down so I don't forget. First one is cognitivism. Second one is non-nihilism. Third one is stance independence. And then the fourth optional one is epistemic. Okay. So moral realism is a 3 or 4 part thesis. The first part is something like cognitivism. So this is the idea that whenever we make moral judgments, at least oftentimes when we make moral judgments, we are purporting to describe reality in some way. We are attributing moral properties to actions. So when I say like torturing someone for fun is wrong, I'm basically saying, hey, we've got this action here, torturing someone for fun, and I'm attributing a property of wrongness to that. So I'm not merely like expressing my distaste for this thing. I might partly be doing that, but I'm not merely doing that. I'm not saying like boo, torture, like boo, like that can't be true or false. The cognitivist says, no, these moral claims, at least many of them, can be true or false. They can be truth apt. They express propositions that are purporting to describe the way that reality is. They're typically going to be ascribing moral properties to actions. That's usually what they're going to be doing. So that's cognitivism. It basically says, when we make moral claims, the claims can have a truth value. They can be true or false. They express propositions that purport to describe reality. Okay, that's cognitivism. Non-nihilism then says that, hey, some of those moral claims are true. So they're not all false. So at least some of them are true. So for instance, it's true that like torturing people for fun is wrong. So that's non-nihilism. It says, hey, at least some of them are true. The third thesis in moral realism is called stance independence. And that's the view that the truth and falsity of these moral claims doesn't depend on what we think. It doesn't depend on our beliefs, it doesn't depend on our desires, it doesn't depend on our attitudes. Philosophers call those stances. They're stances that we take towards things, like a preference or a desire or a belief. So stance independence says, yeah, the truth value of these moral claims does not depend on our stances. They're stance independent. They don't depend on our preferences, our desires, our beliefs, and so on. Like, even if we had all thought that torturing someone for fun was okay, it wouldn't be okay, because the truth of that is not dependent on our stances.
Okay.
So that's the third part of moral realism. And that's, I think, a core moral realist view, just those three. Moral claims are truth apt, so they can be true or false. They express propositions that describe reality. Secondly, at least some of them are actually true. So they really do, in fact, describe reality. They don't merely just purport to describe reality, but they really do. So some of them are true, and the truth value of these moral claims doesn't depend on our stances. So they're stance independent. That's oftentimes why you hear people say that they're objective moral truths. They don't depend on us. They're not don't depend on our subjective stances. So that's the core of moral realism. Now there's a fourth claim, which is an epistemic claim, which is often added, and that's the view that we know at least some of these moral truths. So not only are there not only are there some stance independent moral truths, but we also have epistemic access to some of those. We know that some of these are true. Like, we know that torturing people for fun is wrong. We know that giving to the needy is generally good, etc. So yeah, that's moral realism. And I guess the main reason that people give for moral realism is basically to reflect on particular cases and, to just say that it seems really plausible in those, it seems really plausible when you reflect on those cases that moral realism is true. So for instance, take the case of torturing someone for fun, just because you want to hear them scream. That seems to be that seems to be cognitive in nature. We seem to be purporting to describe reality. We seem to be attributing a moral property like wrongness to an action, namely torturing someone for fun. So we've got the cognitivism element. It also seems to be true. It's not like that's false. It's not like that's a false claim. No, it really is the case that torturing someone for fun, just to hear them squeal, is wrong. That really is the case. So that's non-nihilism. And then stance independence. People... So the moral realist is going to say, it just seems really plausible that, even if we all, for some reason, we all wanted to torture this unfortunate person for fun, even if we all wanted to do that, even if we all thought it was okay, it still would have been bad.
Yeah.
It still would have been wrong. It doesn't depend on our stances. It's a fact. There's a fact of the matter about that, and we could all be wrong about that. So it doesn't depend on what we think about it, our preferences. So that's how moral realists generally motivate their view. They go through the cognitivism, non-nihilism, and stance independence for these clear cases and say, that just seems really plausible. And once you have those, then moral realism follows. So that's the basic idea.
Okay. I heard one of your videos where you were talking about some God related moral arguments where there's this divine command theory and the objections. I don't know if you care to mention a bit about that, because people tend to think if somebody states, "Oh, morals can be objective," then God exists.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So I think some people think that in order for morality to be objective, you have to have some kind of have to have some kind of divine being outside of us that like grounds them, either that like makes them true, or that commands them, or somehow explains them. For me, I don't find that plausible. There are several reasons for that. One main reason is just that there are lots of like non-theistic accounts of morality, non-theistic groundings of morality. Like that's the whole purpose of meta-ethics. Actually, I've got a book here called The Foundations of Ethics, an anthology. And if I recall correctly, I don't think God is even like mentioned in here, or if he is, it's like very rarely. So a lot of this is dedicated, almost all of this is dedicated to meta-ethics, which is the field of studying like the nature and ultimate grounding of morality. And there are just boatloads of non-theistic theories. Like you could ground moral truths in terms of pleasure and pain. You could ground it in terms of the flourishing and languishing conditions set by the intrinsic natures of conscious beings. You could ground it in certain principles of consistency. You can ground it in certain principles of universalization. You can ground it in certain, like what we all would hypothetically agree to were we in a kind of ideal, fair decision situation, etc. Like there are a bunch of different groundings, accounts, explanations of morality that make no reference to God whatsoever. And a lot of these are defended by very able philosophers. And in order to argue that you need God to ground morality, you'd have to systematically go through every single one of these accounts and decisively show that they are false, which is a huge task that I don't think anyone has successfully done, let alone, well, I doubt that, let's just say that. I don't think anyone has successfully done that. So that's the first problem. There are lots of non-theistic accounts of morality. The second thing to say is just like, there are lots of objections to a theistic account of morality. So let's imagine that God is about to command something like that torturing people for fun is wrong. He's about to command that. Now, does God have like a reason to command that or not? If he doesn't have a reason to command that, if there's literally no reason whatsoever why he's commanding this, then his command is arbitrary. I mean, that's just the definition of arbitrariness. You don't have any reason whatsoever. So, and I think that if morality is arbitrary in that way, that's just like disastrous. Like, we typically tend to think of like morality as having a kind of normative authority over us, like we should obey it. But like if it's just these arbitrary rules, it seems to lack that kind of principled authority over us. So I don't think the arbitrariness horn is going to be all that good. So they're going to want to say that no, God really does have a reason to command us not to torture. Maybe that reason is because of the victim's pain. Maybe it's because that violates certain universalizable principles. Maybe because, etc. Well, then once you admit that God has a reason to command that, what I'm going to want to say is like, well, then all you need to appeal to is that very reason in order to ground morality, right? That's all that you need to appeal to. Cut out the middleman, cut out the God, and you still have the reason there. And it's the reason which is doing the explanatory heavy lifting here. God's command here is just an intermediary. Yeah. So I think the reason is what is doing the heavy lifting here. It's the reason that explains why torturing the person is wrong. Yeah, because of the suffering that the victim undergoes, or because that is contrary to their dignity as a human being, or, etc. So, yeah, he either doesn't have a reason or he does. If he doesn't, then I think the view is false because it lands into arbitrariness. If he does have a reason, then I don't think God's doing the explanatory heavy lifting with respect to morality. I think it's the reason. And so you can have that under an atheistic worldview, I think. So anyway, that's the basic thrust.
That's wonderful. It looks a lot like the Euthyphro dilemma, right?
It's inspired by that. So this is kind of like a modified Euthyphro dilemma. We're not really asking, do God's commands make something right? Or, we're not asking, like, does God command something because it's right, or is it right because God commands it? We're more so just focused on the reasons that God bases his commands off of. So it is similar, but it's slightly different.
Okay. Now, I would really like to pick your mind on this part because I need to watch those videos again. Your rebuttals and undercutting the feeders for causal finitism. I think I heard you say that causal finitism might entail denying science or something like that.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't think it would entail denying science, but there are aspects of science which give us reason to think that space and time are continuous. That is, like, they're like infinitely divisible and in fact infinitely divided. They go shorter and shorter and shorter. There's no like smallest unit of space or time. There are aspects of science that give us reason to think that. By contrast, causal finitism plausibly entails, or at least makes it really hard to get out of, thinking that space and time can't be continuous in that way. Because if it were, well then, like, just imagine, like, whenever I drop this pen, there would seem to be an infinite causal process there. Because if time is really infinitely divided, well then you can look at the state, you can look at a snapshot of this pen at each of those infinitely many moments, and the state of this pen at each of those infinitely moments causally affects its position at the end. Like, it's because it's here causally, it's because it was here at this point, and there were such and such conditions and laws of nature operative, and then same thing with this point and this point and this point. So we'd have an infinite causal chain leading up to a particular event. There are some ways that you can get. There are some ways that you can try to get around that entailment. They're really complicated. And you have to add all these auxiliary hypotheses to your view, which makes it much less probable. But like, you can kind of see, at least intuitively, how it pushes you in the direction of denying the continuity of space, causal finitism, that is. But if we have a reason to think that space is continuous, then that's a reason to think that causal finitism is false then. And so, you know, some aspects of science give us reason to think that space and time are continuous. I think at least, like, general and special relativity treat them that way, and these are exceptionally empirically well-confirmed theories. I mean, technically speaking, we know that these aren't the full story of reality, right? We have to merge, we have to have a marriage between the classical theories of special and general relativity and then quantum mechanics. We don't yet have a theory of quantum gravity, and we need that in order to arbitrate, I think, on the fundamental structure of space-time. So, like, I think ultimately the jury is still out, but, like, still, the very fact that we have these very successful scientific theories that treat space in a way that is incompatible with causal finitism at least pushes us towards thinking causal finitism might be, you know, it puts a dent in our confidence in causal finitism. Because, I mean, you know, these theories are empirically very well confirmed, and, you know, it may very well be the case that the continuous space and time are preserved into, you know, into our quantum gravity theory. So, so yeah, it's a complicated area, but, you know, the point is just that we may have a reason here, and I think it's a reason to be very cautious about accepting causal finitism. So, so yeah. And also, one final thing. Even if we don't have a reason here to think that space and time are actually continuous, all we kind of need here is that they're, like, possibly continuous, right? If they're positive, because causal finitism is a thesis about what's necessarily the case. It says you cannot have infinite causal chains. So if it's at least possible to have continuous time, and, you know, something like this happening, and this dropping, and that's going to be a problem for causal finitism. And, like, I think if our physical theories are very empirically well confirmed and are committed to something, that gives us reason to think that that thing is at least possible. So yeah. Anyway.
Okay. Well, yeah, look at this. I'm just saying that it doesn't matter if time is continuous or it can't be divided infinitely, because I don't know. I'm used to saying that since from non-being, being cannot come from non-being, well, the world cannot have begun. There is no way that the world began. So, and I'm really set on well, not accepting concrete beings, timeless concrete beings. Like a being without time is like I don't know. It doesn't make sense. It's like thinking of something that exists never. Like yeah. So I tend to say, well, okay. So what? The reality or the world didn't begin, and time is eternal, and there is an infinite to the past. Oh no, you can't get to now. Yeah, well, it has the quality of infinite. You can't count, but it's infinite towards the past. That I tend to argue like that. I don't know if I'm wrong.
Yes, I mean, again, we can kind of distinguish here between, like, whether or not there are positive reasons to think that the past is infinite versus, like, whether the reasons to think that it isn't or couldn't be succeed. So for me, like, I don't know whether the past is infinite or not. Like, I don't know. I think the jury is out on that question, honestly. What I do think is that the main arguments for thinking that the past couldn't be infinite don't succeed. So, you know, you just alluded to one where it's like, oh, yes, we wouldn't be able to arrive at now. I mean, like, well, why not? Why not? And usually they can't, in my experience, people oftentimes are unable to answer that. They just have this kind of intuition that you couldn't arrive at now, maybe because like it's too long or something. It's too long. Infinity is too long to traverse or something like that. I don't
They
share that intuition. Yeah, what do you think?
they state that an infinite amount of events must have happened in order to get here. Like it's like they don't get that there is no point A towards this point B.
Yeah. So it's like, yes, infinitely many events had to elapse in order to get here. That's the hypothesis of an infinite past. What's problematic about that? That's what I want to ask them. Now, if they are imagining that there's like a point A, and then you have to like go through an infinity of events to eventually get to a point B. Yeah, okay, fine. Maybe that's implausible. That's improbable. I think that's intuitively, intuitively implausible. If you have to go through infinite duration to get to another point, I don't think you're ever going to get to that other point if you're starting from a point. But the thing is, the infinite past, you're not starting from a point. The hypothesis in question is that it's beginningless, right? It doesn't have a starting point. So what's so bad about that? And then, when I've asked people this, they're usually unable to respond to that. They usually just fall back on a kind of table thumping intuition. It's like, no, it's too long. You can't traverse it. And I'm like, why? Tell me. I don't have this intuition. Can you tell me why? And I have been unable to find people who can convince me of this argument. And again, as you point out, the main arguments in this area say, well, you can't count to infinity if you start now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You're never going to be able to get to a point at which you have finished counting all the numbers. And again, it's the same problem that we just mentioned. Yeah, in that case, you're starting from a point, and then you're counting. Yeah, okay, if you're counting at equal intervals, there will never come a time at which you can like finally say, yes, I've just finished counting all the natural numbers. Because that would require there to be a point here, and then to span an infinite amount of time and reach an endpoint. But that's not what's happening in the beginningless past, right? Here, you're starting with a beginning, and you're trying to get to an end of an endless process. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. But in the case of infinite past, you're not starting from a beginning and then getting to the end of something endless. Instead, you're never starting at all, and you're getting to the end of something which does have an end. What's problematic about that? I don't see anything problematic about that, and it's a hasty generalization to think that because you can't get to the end of an endless process with a beginning, that therefore you can't get to the end of a process which has an end but no beginning. That's just a hasty generalization. That just doesn't follow. It's just a non sequitur. It doesn't follow. So yeah, I've never been able to convince myself of this argument. So yeah.
I understand. And for those who want to know if William Lane Craig somehow tried to disprove Christianity, you can watch the Hilbert Hotel.
That is true. That is true. Yeah. So it sounds clickbaity. It sounds like I'm just being provocative. But that's like actually the conclusion of the argument. Like if his argument succeeds, then he has disproved Christianity because it shows you that the future cannot be endless. And if Christianity is true, the future is endless. And so if his argument succeeds and the future isn't endless, and Christianity implies that the future is endless, then it follows that Christianity is false, if his argument succeeds. So, yeah, I explain why that is the case in the video, my Hilbert's Hotel video, which is in my Clone playlist. And I can recommend people check that out.
Okay. Well, Joe, it's been an hour. I know you are a very busy person, and I don't want to abuse. Some people said that they were gonna ask questions, but I saw no questions, so I kept going with my. I had a few questions of my own that I wanted to pass on by you and pick your mind, and I would really love to have you again some other time. I know that. Well, if you want to close up, do you have more plans in the future besides those nine forthcoming papers?
Yeah, so I mean, I've got a lot of stuff currently under construction, currently under review. The review process, for people who don't know, takes months to years. So don't expect anything anytime soon that's new on that end. I mean, fingers crossed that some of my papers will be published this year, new papers, and I'll do videos on those whenever that happens. But yeah, I mean, I've got some cool plans coming up. My next video, it might be out this Sunday. We'll see. It's actually already out for patrons. But yeah, it's a response to a recent video that William Lane Craig made on the Kalam. It's about the endless future. It's going to be another video on the Kalam series. I'm very excited. It talks about causal finitism as well, Grim Reapers, endless future. More on that. Fun stuff. I enjoyed putting it together. I made a cool PowerPoint for this one. So anyway, and it's got some animations. So I think you'll like it, and I think the audience will like it. So that's the next one. I've also got a video, a user's guide to Bayes' theorem coming up. I don't know when, maybe in a month, something like that. It's going to be a very, very very good video, if I do say so myself. I'm excited. I just finished the script today, so it's a long script, so it's going to be a long video, but it's going to be very thorough, and I'm not going to be presupposing too much background knowledge, so I'm going to try to make it accessible to most most people if they give it some effort. So that's coming up, and then yeah. Other than that, there isn't much else coming up. I'm going to be hearing back in March and April about if I and which schools I get into for grad school, so that's exciting. But yeah, that's the main stuff. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed this.
No, it was wonderful. Thank you. I'm really honored. I was really nervous. I hope it didn't notice that much. I was incredibly excited.
Yeah, no, that was fun. That was great. That was awesome.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time, Joe. For everyone who has been here for the last hour, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your comments on the chat, on the live chat. I'm sorry if I didn't answer any of your questions. I didn't see any questions. I saw a lot of comments, and apparently you speak a bit fast for Spanish-speaking people.
That's true. Yeah, that is true. I do speak fast, which is so. I mean, people can if they want. If this is on YouTube, what they could do if they wanted, they could go to the little. So I'm actually going to point to where it is if I can. It's like right there or something. You know, you can click that little gear icon and then put it to 0.75 speed, and that'll basically slow me down by 25%. And it'll make it a little bit more comprehensible. It's the same thing when I was in Spanish class. Sometimes when we'd listen to things in Spanish, they'd be talking at their normal pace, or even maybe slightly fast for them, and I would really struggle. I would really struggle. I need people to go slowly for me. You know, they have to say like, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
I understand. It's the same for any foreign language learning.
Yeah, well, and also it is true. I know that this is the case, that in general I do speak, shall we say, kind of fast. So that is also true even for you know, I guess an average English speaker. I kind of speak fast. I mean, it's not like super fast, but you know,
it's normal. I love it, and I love it that it's 3 hours of content.
But it's like, yeah, it's really like 5 hours of content, but I go fast, so
yeah.
no.
Yeah. Well, the 12-hour video, it's, guys, get it on your podcast. You're gonna love it. For maybe you can take it up for a week or more. You're gonna love it.
Listen to the daily commute. Let's say 30 minutes there, 30 minutes back. That's an hour a day. You could do that basically in like 2 weeks. 2 weeks for your hourly commute or something like that.
Exactly. Well, everyone, thank you very much for coming to the Atheist Pub. If you want to help the channel, you can join at any time. Please make sure to visit the Majesty of Reason YouTube channel and his website. He also, I think you have a Twitter as well, right?
I do. I mean, I'm not very active on it. It's mainly just announcing for my videos.
Okay.
So, but yeah, people follow the Twitter. Definitely do that. But yeah, I'm not very active.
Okay. Well, everyone, thank you very much for your time. This has been the Atheist Pub. I am Rafael Tapia, and as always, I wish you good night and good luck.